We're going to be looking at the entire jury process comprehensively in this video. I highly recommend you watch this to the very end, as it will likely answer a lot of questions about how to do the jurying process. In short, the jury process is a three-step process. 1, your jury users will do the regular rating based on your settings set up here in the jury details section. Next, you'll go ahead and use the jury estimator tool to find the logical breakpoints of where you want to jury in and jury out certain items. You'll then go ahead and do the mark juried status, where you'll mass mark all of your entries as either juried in, juried out, or advanced to round 2. And then you go ahead and manually send all of the jury notification emails, letting the entrants know of their status. Now, what I'm going to do here first is just overview these settings and show you how this affects the jury process for the juror users. The first one here is the jury completion date. This date shows up by default in the user front end. So the users will have this date, which tells them they should expect to hear their results back as to the jury notification by this date. So essentially, this is when you estimate your jury process will be completed and when you can go ahead and notify your users. The max voting stars simply controls how many stars show up for the juror users. You can see by default here, I'm logged in as a juror in this view, so you can see what it looks like for the juror. And by default, there's a 5-star rating. Half stars are enabled, allowing for a total of 10 votes on each entry, because you can have half-star ratings, so 0, 0.5, 1, 1.5, etc. Now, the next value here is the Show Juror Voting History. So I can toggle this on. I'm going to go ahead and select on here and update, and I'll move back over to this juror and refresh. With this on, you can see it gives me a new column here called Average. And this will show me, if I have multiple jurors, the average between all of the different jurors' votes right here in the voting history. It also gives me this little star icon where I can come in here and click this, and I can see exactly all of the ratings that other jurors have rated on this, along with the star value and date they gave that. So if you want to be able to see other juror ratings, you can enable that as needed. We typically recommend you work with this off, as to avoid some of the groupthink or having certain jurors may influence other jurors. The next one here is the randomized order of submissions. So if I turn this on and go ahead and update the jury settings, when I come back over here and refresh, you'll notice that the order here of the submissions themselves will be randomized for the juror users per juror user. So each juror user will actually have a different randomization of the order that the entries appear in than the other juror. So you can go ahead and randomize those. Next setting here is show user agreements to jurors. If you toggle this on, these are somewhat rare, but this means that any of your user agreement PDFs that you have uploaded will also be visible to users, or rather to the juror users. The other one here is show juror note to users. So I'm going to go ahead and update this. Now, in here in the jury view, you can see that each juror, when they're adding submissions, can add notes. Now, regularly, these notes are private notes. They're only visible to the juror users and the admin users. However, you can toggle that setting on, and whatever juror note is added here will also be visible to the end user. So when they log in and look at their submission, they would be able to see a note there of what the juror commented on. Again, that setting is somewhat rare as well. Next, we're going to come back to this one last, the round 2 jury here I'll do in a second. So the next one here is the hide jury status for the users. If I turn this on, that means that the users will never see the jury in or jury out status on their entries. Even after this completion date, they will never see that. So this is also somewhat rare. And then this one here is enabled jury scorecard. So if I turn on the jury scorecard, you can see it gives me a few more advanced metrics that I can turn on. So I've got a couple here set up, and I'll go ahead and just update this. You can add as many of these metrics as you need. And now when I come over here to the jury view and refresh, you can see now I've got a separate star rating for each of those jury criteria. The way the jurying works is all of the votes are actually added together, and then they're averaged as well. So if this one has 5 stars and this one has, let's assume 10, then this would mean this has 15 total stars overall. Now, back here, the setting that we skipped here, actually, before I do that, I'll just quickly mention here, if you need to have a blind jury where none of the user details are visible to the jurors, you can go ahead and select this, or you can hide any specific submission fields. You can uncheck this and also pick individual fields you want to hide from the jurors, or show to the jurors. So for example, if I hide the user first name, I'll go ahead and update this. And I'll switch back over here to the juror view and refresh. And you can see when I come over here and look at the user details, I can see all of the details here, but the user first name itself is not going to appear. And same thing here. If I hide the title, it'll say hidden right here. So anything that I hide, of course, won't be visible. You can see I have a last name column, but the first name column is no longer visible. So that's a way you can sort of choose which fields are visible and not. Now, the last setting here is the Activate Round 2 Jury. Now, this setting is not often used, but this is used when you have a two-step jury process. So you may have an initial vetting process, and you want to narrow those initial set of entries down to a final jury. And so I'll show you how this works. So typically, the regular jury process is where your jury users would go ahead and do their jury rating. So you can see this juror user in his voted submissions already has a few. So he's done some ratings here. I'll just use this as my sample. So in a typical jury process, assuming we do not have round 2, once the jurors are done, the admin user would come in here to the jury settings, and they would use this jury estimator tool to find breakpoints. So I can say, show me everything above a 3-star average. And this tells me that there's going to be 5 entries above that. So I'll just use this as my metric for the fine art. So I'll come in here to my mark juried status, and I'm going to say everything in fine art I want to mark as juried in where the average rating is greater than 3. So this means that any entries that are exactly 3 would not be juried in because it's only greater than. So if I wanted to include 3, I would say 2.99 or something like that. That would include everything above that, so 3 and above. We'll just say 3 here, and I'm going to go ahead and say mark entries. Now you can pretty safely mark these entries as needed because you can always reset and edit at a later date. And you can see, sure enough, 5 entries are now marked as juried in. So if I come down here and look at my submissions tab now to look at the actual data, you can see that that one's juried in. You know, there should be 5 within there. In fact, if I filter by the fine art category, we can see that there are 5 entries in here that are juried in. And I can always sort by this J column. So I can click the J column, and I can either sort this ascending or descending. So if I sort it this way, I can see all of the juried ins on top. And you can see those are the 5 that I was just barely marked as juried in. So again, this is just a status at this point. We can always manually edit. So let's assume that I've mass marked all of my entries, but later on I decide I need to actually jury this one out. I can just come to a single entry, click the edit button, and always manually override that. So I can change its juried status to juried out, and then go ahead and update. And this one would be now juried out or back to pending, for example. So you always have control as the admin user over exactly which entries are marked in or out. So again, in a single round jury, you would then have all of the statuses of your entries should be either in or out. Once you have all of those statuses as marked, of course, I would do the opposite here. I would come into my mark juried status, and I would say everything in fine art I want to jury out where the average rating is less than 3. So I'll go ahead and mark those. And then let's come back over here and again, look at the submissions tab. Just to kind of reiterate here, if I go look at my fine art, you can see now I have everything that has a jury rating is either in or out. These ones here have not been marked yet. Oh, there's one that it's exactly 3, you can see. But these ones right here didn't get marked because they have no jury votes yet. So they haven't even been voted on. And that's kind of the way, again, I can sort this by the J column, and you can see it'll sort it by all of the jury statuses like so. So assuming you have all of those set how you want, your then final step would then be to come into the jury settings, send jury status emails. So then I can mass email whenever I'm ready all of the statuses. So I would simply say, okay, I want all of the jury in emails to be sent at once. As soon as you press this button, it will email each user individually per submission. So they'll get an email for each of their juried in entries. Of course, the email template is customizable here in your email templates. You can put any verbiage you want in the juried in template and the juried out template. You can edit those as needed. And that's how you would then send the juried status. So let's now look at how it works if we have a 2-step or a 2-round jury process. It's very similar. However, when I come into my mark juried status, instead of jurying in an initial batch, I would actually set that to advance to round 2. So I'll just do this for a secondary category here. I'm going to choose my photography category. And I'm going to say, okay, everything in photo, I want to advance to round 2 where the average jury rating is greater than, I'll just pick a number here at random, 2.33. And I'll say mark entries. And let's see how many this tells us. So you can see that 6 entries were then marked. So now if I go to my submissions tab, and I'll filter here by the photography category here, so you can see this. Notice how there's a little number 2. So there's a number 2 on that one. Again, I'll sort by this column so you can see. So that one has a 2, 2, 2. This means that all of these entries are now advanced to round 2. So that's what you would do in order to advance all of the entries to round 2. So in a 2-step process, you should advance everything you want to round 2, and everything else you would jury out. So you still need to do your jury out process as well. The final status of all entries in the very end should either be juried in or juried out. So then I would say, okay, in my photography category, I want to jury out everything that is lesser than, and I can't even remember my number here, but I'll just do it again, 2.33, I think it was close to what it was. So this is going to jury out all of those. So now I have a set of entries in round 2 and a set of entries that are juried out. Once you've done that for all of your categories, you would then come into jury process settings and you then activate round 2. So now when I hit update, round 2 jury is essentially now turned on. What that means is then when all of your juror users come and log in again, they will only see the entries that have been advanced to round 2. And you can see here I'm only seeing these 6 records because that's the only amount of records that are in round 2. They then go ahead and re-jury as default. So again, they're only going to see a subset of the entries, only the entries you've advanced. So I'll just go ahead and do a quick marking on each of these, sort of at random here. And then now that I've sort of voted on all these in round 2, now if I go back to the admin user view and go ahead and come down here to my submissions tab, you essentially repeat the process. So all of these in round 2, if I look at the jury history, you can see that here's all my jury votes. These first 3 jury votes were from round 1. The second jury vote is from round 2. And so then you kind of just repeat the process. So then I would come in here to my jury estimator tool and I would say, okay, I'm in round 2. So everything in photo that's greater than 2.5, that's going to give me 50%. So 3 out of 6 would be juried in. And again, this is only applying to the round 2 entries because I have round 2 activated. Notice it says here, this is based on round 2. So then I can come over here to my mark juried status, and now I just repeat the process. So I say, okay, everything in photography, I want to jury in where the average rating is greater than 2.5. And entries are in round 2. I go ahead and say mark entries. This should then mark in those 3 entries. You can see, sure enough. So those 3 entries have now been juried in. And then I would do the same thing. I need to jury out all of the entries in round 2. So in photo, I want to jury out everything that is lesser than 2.5 that's in round 2 and mark those entries. So that should also mark those 3 as well. And then now when I go back to my submissions tab, again, I'll go over to my photography category, and you can now see that the statuses are now either in or out. So the jury status doesn't have a round 2 anymore because I've now advanced those round 2 entries either to be accepted or rejected. So there's the 3 that are juried in, and there's all the rest that are juried out. Again, this juried out group includes some of the initial round 1 things that were juried out, and then also the round 2 things that didn't make the final cut as well. So then once you have all the final status, again, you can always do your manual adjustments. So I can come in here and say, well, I need to edit this one for whatever reason, and I need to mark this guy back as juried in, even though it was juried out in the mass jury. And you make any manual adjustments you need. As soon as you're happy with the thresholds and everything has a juried in and juried out status, then you would go ahead and do the send the emails as well. So the 2-step process is very similar to the 1-step process. It's just a matter of advancing things in the jury settings to round 2 and then turning on the activate round 2 setting. Now, typically it's the admin's role to decide where those breakpoints are, as we've seen here, where the jury in and jury out threshold is for each of the categories. Occasionally, we do see where a call will have a single juror, and that juror also is not only sort of doing the jury in, jury out, they're also deciding which entries should be accepted or rejected from the call. In that instance, it's oftentimes maybe to simplify the process for the juror, So in that instance, you can maybe come to your jury and you can just have a 3-star jury system. This way you can instruct your juror, mark everything as 3 stars you want in, mark everything as 1 star that you want out, and then he can maybe do 2s as maybes or something as he's doing his ratings. The juror user always has the ability to look at stats as well. So if I come over here and log in as the juror user, I'm going to turn off round 2 to illustrate this, and come over here to the juror. So you can see I'm logged in as the juror user in this instance, and I only see a 3-star rating. So then I can come in here as a juror user and I can just mark these as 1 or 3 or 1 or 3 or 1 or 3 as needed according to how I want to accept or reject these. So if you know that you can only accept 200 entries because of your gallery space, you can tell your juror user if you're having them do that role as well. Again, this is somewhat atypical, but if your juror user is also doing that, just have a simple 3-step jury process, or a 3-star rather. And then what your juror can do, I'm just adding these ratings here, is they can come in and look at their jury stats as well. So he can come in and look at jury stats. So then the juror user could say, okay, I want to see everything greater than 2. So if they just marked 2 for all of these, it's going to tell them exactly, okay, 13 was juried in here, 1 was juried in here, 1 here, 1 here, for a total of 24. And then if they need to make adjustments, let's say they can only accept 20 and they're like, well, I'm a little too high, they can come back into the all my voted submissions and always update. So you can say, okay, this one I decide it's not going to make the cut anymore. I'm going to make that a 1. I'll make this one a 1. We'll make this one a 1 and this one a 1. And then I'll go ahead. Whoops, I'm forgetting to actually update those. Now I can't remember which ones I did. Update, I'll just update a couple here. Update, update, update. Now let's go back here to the jury stats. And again, I'll put in the number 2 for each of these. I'm just hitting tab as I'm moving down. And you can see now I only have 21 accepted. So your juror user, if you're having them do that role, can always make adjustments as needed. And then that way, you as the admin user, when you come back to your job as of actually marking them in or out, you can also do the same jury stats. So you can come into the jury stats and see all their votes and averages and whatnot. And you can always use the same jury estimator tool that they see. When the admin user does it, it of course averages the votes between all of the jurors instead of just the single juror. But anyway, then you sort of, it's very easy for you to come into your marked juried status and you just say, okay, everything that's, greater than 2, marked juried in, everything that's lesser than 2, marked juried out. And you know that that will accept all the 3s and reject all the 1s. So if you're having your juror user do that, this is a simple way that they can accomplish that task. And the third user that's involved in the process is if you have awards. So if you do have awards set up and you need to assign entries to awards, that is where the judge user comes in. So you can go ahead and create a judge user. When a judge logs in, they will only see the entries that have been juried in, and they are able to then go ahead and assign those entries to specific awards that you have set up as well.